Welcome to Conversations from the Edge of Consciousness. I'm your host, Kristine Madera. For me, and possibly for you, the inner world of consciousness has always been much more real and way more fun than the so-called real material world. Growing up, I thought I was alone in this, but I'm not. There are a lot of us, and far too many have no one to talk to who shares this experience. I've been lucky to cultivate a community of friends who love to talk about the energies, ideas, and vibrations that are pushing the edges of our own consciousness, as well as our collective consciousness. In Conversations from the Edge, we share our conversations with you. Welcome to Conversations from the Edge. This is your host, Kristine Madera, and we are back today with Kristina Mand-Lakhiani. And Kristina is the co-founder of Mindvalley and has been in the personal transformation industry for over 17 years. She's an incredibly talented international speaker, entrepreneur, artist, philanthropist, and mother of 2 kids. She's also an international speaker and author of the transformational quest, 7 Days to Happiness and Live by Your Own Rules. Kristina speaks about personal transformation, authenticity, understanding, and accepting yourself, and the path to happiness. She was recognized as one of the top 10 influential people online, making a difference in the world today, and received the Influencers for Change Award by Global Impact Creators. So welcome, Kristina. It is wonderful to have you back.
Thank you for having me back.
So in our last conversation, you shared about being authentic. We talked a lot about authenticity. And authenticity, it kind of goes hand in glove with vulnerability. And we kind of have this one-sided view of what vulnerability is, but you have defined it, or you've used the definition that vulnerability is doing something without knowing what the result is going to be. And I love that because it's such an open way to live in this state of vulnerability. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to understand vulnerability as something more than being, in that tearful state?
It's my path to most of the topics that I talk about right now, be it authenticity or vulnerability, came through trying to understand happiness. And that was an interesting thing. And I have to say straight away, but both authenticity and vulnerability are very curious terms, which I love and I use, but I also giggle at them usually. And I'll explain why. I think people will understand why I giggle at them. But I came to them through trying to research happiness, and it was an interesting thing. I thought, I as a person who has co-created big personal growth company. At some point in my career, I thought, I'll create my own course. And I decided to create a course that combines all the teachings of different people and all the most important things for me, how to live a happy life. And of course, one of the modules was happiness. So I was talking about a lot of things, but happiness was definitely one of the things I had to talk about. So that was years ago. And I started researching happiness from that point. And the more I researched it, there's a lot of information on happiness. A lot of teachers talk about that. A lot of authors, speakers, books, researchers. It's a huge field. We could have university degrees on happiness, I think. But the interesting thing is that the more I learned about it, the more I came to my own understanding of what it means for me. And happiness is a unique thing. For every single person, happiness is a certain unique expression of themselves and how they live their life. Maybe the only explanation I need to say is that I don't equate happiness to an emotion of joy, emotion of being ecstatic. This is emotion. Happiness is more of a state. Because essentially, if you look at the way the fairy tales end and they lived happily ever after, that means that their life was nice and peaceful. Essentially, that means there were no other adventures in their life. So an interesting ending. But to me, happiness was becoming more and more about just being at peace with my life the way it is. Because if you look at the world without emotion, then there are very simple rules of nature. First of all, everything changes. Everything changes all the time.
Yes.
a lot of things don't depend on us, no matter, our life depends on us, and we should take responsibility for everything that happens in our life. But the world is often out of our control. Other people are out of
Yes.
our control. So
Mm-hmm.
if you look at that, and also there is day, there's night. There is, as Susan David says, pain is the price of access to meaningful life. If you want to have anything meaningful in your life, be it relationships, be it your mission in life, your interests, there is a possibility that you will feel pain because something important to you might not happen, or a person who you love might leave or die, God forbid, which will happen actually. So obviously, all of these things are just like changes. Nothing stays the same. Unpredictability, pain, these are such natural parts of life. So obviously, if we want to learn happiness, we have to learn how to be at peace with all of that. And the more I researched it, the more I came to one very simple conclusion. My relationship with the world is defined by the quality of my relationship with me. The more I learn to be honest with myself, the easier it is to be honest with the world. The more I learn to be kind to myself, the easier it is for me to be kind to the world. The more I can be accepting of my own mistakes and flaws and scratches and everything which is wrong about me, the easier it is for me to accept everything that is wrong with the world and with the other people. So I came to this very simple conclusion that my relationship with the outside world depends on my relationship with me. And my definition of happiness is if I can be at peace with myself, love myself, and be happy with myself, then I will learn to be at peace with the world.
Yes, I absolutely agree with that. And I've heard you say too, then in talking about this in terms of happiness, that we all kind of have our own happiness set point, and that you can actually impact your happiness set point so that you can be more at peace with yourself and more at peace with the world. So you're not stuck with some kind of happiness set point. It's actually something that you can influence yourself. Can you talk about that just a little bit?
So basically why I talk about that is because sometimes we like shortcuts. Actually, most of the time we like shortcuts. And a lot of the times we like to take decisions which make us feel better right now. It's true everywhere, in relationships, in business. And we know the trade-off. We know that if you have patience and if you are looking in the long term and you make decisions which will impact you in the long term, you will be better off at the end. Yet it is so tempting to do something right now. So why I'm talking about set point is because my main message is that for you to be more at peace with the world and with yourself and be happier, you really have to learn to fix that from a long-term perspective and not to resort to instant gratification. That's why I talk about set point. And I do believe that if you do those simple practices that I often suggest for that, in the long run, you will lift your set points of happiness. Set point of happiness is something like a thermostat where you set a temperature, and depending on the conditions in the room or outside the temperature, because the thermostat has to keep the temperature at a certain level, it will either heat up the environment or cool down the environment so that the temperature is actually where it's supposed to be. So it is a similar mechanism for humans in many aspects, and happiness is one of them. It's actually a theory, it's a hedonistic adaptation theory, which was created probably or formulated in the middle of the 20th century by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. So it's not my theory, but what I've also learned, and I've been looking into research, that you can actually permanently damage your set points of happiness. So there are situations where you can get traumatized, and that set point of happiness can go down unless you seek professional help and try to get back to normal. Which is why I think it's really important to look at your happiness in a very holistic picture, that it is not just an emotion, not just temporary emotion. It is like this rolling average. No matter what happens to your life, can you get back to normal? Can you get back to your optimistic self? And by optimistic, I mean a person who looks into the future with excitement.
I love how you talk about happiness as a state, 'cause I always talk about love as a state. And that when you think about it in terms of a state, you can be in a state and have experiences that, don't necessarily correlate with the emotions of that state. So you can kind of have that calibration of happiness and experience sadness and experience grief and experience other things without them necessarily disrupting the state of happiness. Not that you're happy as you are sad or happy as you're grieving, but that you can experience things without taking them on or identifying with them as you and having to, go way up and down in your emotional state. You can have the transient experiences of emotions, and you can experience life as it happens, which is kind of the essence of being authentic and vulnerable, and stay in a relatively kind and courageous place, like we talked about last time. But it's when you kind of over identify with the things that are happening, like losing somebody or having a really painful experience, and letting that then pull your set point to something entirely different. So I like the way you talk about that as a state. So how do you talk about, or how do you experience staying in that state of happiness, of authenticity, of being you and experiencing you during those times of really extreme emotion, which really, like, physiologically can pull us in great directions?
It's such an interesting question. Thank you for that. It's and I'm going to answer it for the first time in my life, so I'll see
Oh,
what comes out
okay.
of that.
I'm excited.
That makes me vulnerable. So we'll get back to that at some point.
Okay. All right.
I think it's the problem is that we demonize pain,
Mhm.
thinking that pain is something which we have to avoid, and it is natural that we avoid pain. I mean, our bodies is geared to avoid pain. That's why if we burn our finger, we'll pull the hand away, not to
Mhm.
get more burned, and that is natural. But on the other hand, we have to understand that pain is given to us as a very useful mechanism. In medicine, there is a condition, I should actually look it up, what's the name of that condition, when a person doesn't feel physical pain. What happens is that these people actually die earlier because their body
Mhm.
deteriorates. I mean, there are ailments and there are
Mhm.
hurts and things which need to be healed, but because person doesn't feel physical pain, they can't pay attention to that, they can't notice. And so unless they are monitoring their bodies very carefully, they will
Mhm.
actually get damaged beyond
Yeah.
repair. So a similar thing is with our emotions. We are given the range of emotions to be aware of what's happening to our life.
Mhm.
And pain usually has a function to serve.
Mhm.
Uh, and that is not, I'm not saying that everything happens for a reason or everything happens for the better. No, what
Mhm.
I'm saying is that if we experience pain, there is a reason why we experience that, and it's going to highlight certain things. Sometimes it's highlighting, our values.
Mhm.
Oftentimes it does highlight our values. But I like this reframing of pain. I heard this quote just recently. I just don't remember. It's probably one of the movies that I'm watching with my kids in
Kids'
Marvel
movies are
Universe.
great for, like, life lessons. They're
Oh
they're
my God, I
so
love
transparent. It's wonderful.
it. And they illustrate the very deep things about life in
Mhm.
very vivid and understandable terms. And
Yes.
then there's this character in the movie who said, grief is love persisting. And I think it's so
Mm.
beautiful. Yes, grief is such a painful thing to experience,
Yes.
but grief means that you have loved something very much. And love is such a beautiful experience. You will not experience grief if you never love anyone. So yes, grief might be a painful thing to experience, but it is also the other side of a coin in some way. Mothers will understand. It's easier for women to understand, those who have had children. Delivery is a painful process, but we are willing to go through that pain because on the other side of it, we get the benefit, which is so worth every single ounce of pain that you've experienced. So if we stop demonizing pain and looking at it as something to get rid of, it
Mhm.
is so much easier to get to peace with pain. And physiologically, again, I like to compare everything with physiology. I remember when I was delivering, they taught us breathing exercises, and it didn't make sense I mean, it doesn't make sense to you when you are delivering. You're like, give me some drugs. Breathing is not going to help me. But the truth is that when your body experiences physical pain, if you can relax, the pain is going to subside. And it feels so counterintuitive, because when you feel this stab of pain, you actually contract, and it becomes more painful. But you know how painkillers work. They shut your brain off, and you can relax, and you don't feel anything. I'm simplifying, of course, but what I'm saying is that if you just relax about having pain in your life, it will not be so painful, as ironic as it may sound, but that's how it is. It's interesting. In psychology, they say that stress is not really as harmful to you as the stress about stress. Anxiety is not going to kill you unless you are anxious about your anxiety.
Absolutely true. And I like how you're really correlating everything to the physical, because oftentimes we think of emotion, especially strong emotions, as kind of a mental activity, that was something that we're experiencing on that level, but it's very, very physical. It's based in the nervous system, and it's relieving that pain is also based in the emotional pain is in relieving the nervous system and allowing yourself to soften into it, to experience it, and to allow it to release, instead of trying to, you take a painkiller or suppress it or deny it. So we often, I think, will try to mentalize emotional pain as something that's really just happening in our psyche and not something that's happening in our body. And if we treat it differently as something that's happening in our psyche, that it doesn't need the same attention, it doesn't need the same relief, it doesn't need the same healing as it does as a physical pain might in our body, that we sell it short, and we kind of mute the amount of life that we're willing to experience. Because if you aren't willing to experience pain, you're really not willing to experience life, at least in my experience.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
So then back to the question then is, how do you personally, I know how I do it, I know how some other people do it, and it's kind of a personal experience. And you alluded to it, right, when you said to kind of soften into the body. But how do you experience being in strong emotion without really identifying with that emotion, and maintaining kind of that inner state of who you are, that inner state of connection with your deeper self? There's a lot to navigate in those kind of moments, and really it's something we put some skill sets together, and we all learn how to do it independently, if we learn it at all. But so how does that work for you?
It's so interesting, because why do people even identify with their emotions? It's because emotions are the most changing thing in life. If life is constantly changing, then emotions are constantly changing as well. But we are not taught how to deal with emotions, and often we freeze a certain emotion and we hold on to it. And then we start identifying ourselves with it. But that's not emotion anymore. It's actually already some kind of concept which has become a little bit more physical, because we froze it and because we're holding on to it. The truth about emotions is that they are volatile. They change all the time. It's just that we don't have experience. I've started being more conscious about that later with time. I have a friend. He's a cool teacher. Teaches in Russian, unfortunately, only in Russian. But he has this beautiful practice called open dialogue, and without going too much into detail, because it's a complex practice, but it's incredibly inspiring and transformative practice. So basically, for a fairly extended period of time, you express what you feel at that particular moment. There are rules about it, but what happens is that the moment you express a certain emotion, as you're expressing it, you suddenly notice that it changes. But because you vocalize that expression, become conscious of how volatile emotions are, how they are not frigid at all. So you can go into something feeling scared, paralyzed, maybe scared, or terrified or petrified. And if you start vocalizing what you're feeling, and not necessarily out to the people that you are that are making you feel scared, that's not But even if you're in your head, the moment you
Yeah.
put words to what you feel, the moment you put names to those emotions, you
Yes.
suddenly start noticing that they are changing and becoming something else.
Mm-hmm.
And if you just spend half an hour noticing your emotions and giving them names, you will suddenly realize how quickly they go through you and change.
Mm-hmm.
And different fragments of unexpected emotions may show up in the middle of this all. And if you start practicing it, you will stop identifying yourself with emotions, because this is so, how can you identify with something which might maybe is just a fleeting moment and then it doesn't last long and then it's something else? I guess the easiest way to learn to deal with that is to learn emotional agility. I'm using a term actually by Susan David, but there are a lot of teachers who teach how to work with emotions. And one rule, if you think that you're emotionally a little rigid and not flexible and don't understand or don't feel them well, one simple exercise is to learn the vocabulary of emotions. There are 300 something English names for emotions, maybe close to 400. But all we know is, well, think of the movie Inside Out. I don't blame it. It's actually a great movie. But we identified 5 emotions there, or 6, 5, I think it was.
I think it's 5, yeah.
Yeah, but even the same sadness, disgust, joy, there are so many different facets. We talk about being stressed or being angry, but there are these are umbrella emotions, and you can come up with tens of different facets to them. So the easiest exercise to do is to start naming your emotions as precisely as you can. What's the difference between being lightly irritated, annoyed, outraged, I don't know, discontent? These are all different facets of, broadly speaking, one emotion, being upset or angry. So if you start naming them by their proper names and looking up the names and researching them a little bit, researching them in the dictionaries and also in your body, how light irritation is different from indignation. In terms of your physical body, where do they express? How do you feel them? You will start realizing how passing emotions are, and it will be almost impossible to identify yourself to any emotion, because you have all of them, all 300 something.
I have a friend and she grew up speaking a different language, but she spoke English as well. And she was in a weird mood one day, and I said, "Well, what's going on?" And she said she couldn't explain it to me because it wasn't an English emotion. And I thought, well, that stinks. So even culturally, we've got different emotional templates in different contexts and in different kind of thought processes and language processes. But one of the things in English in particular that I think makes it hard, well, actually easy to identify with emotions and hard to kind of come into that being a person experiencing an emotion, is the language pattern that we've attached to emotions, which is identification. I am sad. I am angry. I am this. So it takes the I am, that state of who I am, and it attaches the emotion, and it really makes that emotion your identity. And it's subtle and it's subconscious, but it becomes, it becomes the way that we express. And so even changing the vocabulary to I am experiencing sadness, I am experiencing anger, I am experiencing disgust, I'm experiencing joy, gives us that little bit of distance between me and the being I am, and the state I am, and the state of happiness or the state of love or my state of being, that internal expression of me and what I'm experiencing in that moment. So I don't know how it works in other languages, but I think English, if we can flip that in English language, it would do a lot to helping people understand that they are not the emotion that they're experiencing in that moment.
It's a really good technique that's also suggested. You can also say I feel sadness, or feel something, because that also creates a distance to some degree. I'm not very vocal, I guess, when it comes to experiencing my emotions. Or maybe it's practice, and it is not constricting for me to express it in any way. I'm more focused on trying to pinpoint what does it feel exactly? How does it feel? Like what is this emotion exactly that I'm feeling right now? So yeah, I agree. It's definitely good not to brand yourself as a certain thing, but then it goes beyond just the immediate expression of emotion. We often freeze certain states and then go around with those states for a long time. Like if you experience anxiety and depression, you might be out of it like a long time, but you're still used to feeling that, oh, but I feel a bit depressed, or that might have been, you're depressed today and you're depressed 3 months ago might be so different. And that being stuck with emotions is definitely, or with your states, is definitely something to unlearn. I agree with that.
One of the things around something like vulnerability, you can get used to vulnerability, but vulnerability in kind of the physiological system is really being able to maintain that state of uncertainty because we don't know what's going to happen. We're kind of showing up as we are in that moment in the state of being me and meeting that moment as it is without trying to have a certain outcome, without expectations about what it's going to be. It's inherently uncertain. And the way our brains really operate is that uncertainty is scary. Uncertainty triggers the nervous system, and you can teach yourself to be more comfortable with uncertainty. But it's that state of openness, that state of uncertainty, that state of vulnerability that really allows you to experience life as, as fully as you can in that moment. And so how has this worked for you? How have you cultivated that openness to life in a way that doesn't overload? Because a lot of times that feeling of uncertainty is an overloading emotion that pulls us out of that state of being ourselves.
Oh, I think I'm still a student. I'm still a work in progress for sure, because I know
Yeah,
I've
me
run away
too.
from situations just because I don't like the reality of that.
Hmm.
Uh, it's well, what might help, with everything in life, what helps are
Hmm.
two things. Thing number one, looking at things philosophically, and thing number one, looking at things with humor. So
Hmm.
philosophy and humor always help with anything in life, and humor is usually the last resort. If philosophy doesn't help, at least you can laugh at yourself. But being a little more serious, if we look about if we look at that uncertainty from a purely philosophical point of view, everything is uncertain. And
Yes.
chasing certainty is a delusion. We think
Hmm.
that we can make something certain. I love this quote from one of my favorite books, Master and Margarita. It's by Bulgakov, and the main character there says, um, the fact that human is mortal is half the problem. The problem is that he's mortal unexpectedly. Uh,
Oh,
so
that is great. Wow.
it's a little morbid, but the thing is that
Uh-huh.
the fact that the world is uncertain is a given.
Hmm.
The problem is that we are sometimes forgetting that it is uncertain, and we live in the
Yes.
illusion that there is some kind of certainty. There's no certainty about anything in life. In 2020, when the year started, we were certain about our plans. By the end of 2020, I will do this, this, and this. And then March hit, and the world went on on close. And we were
Yeah.
like, oh my God, my life is so uncertain. No, it was uncertain on the 1st of January 2020. We just
Yes.
didn't know about it. The
Hmm.
only difference is that in January 2020, we didn't know that we were vulnerable and uncertain. In March 2020, we were suddenly aware of something which did not change at all.
Hmm.
So we're just a little more aware of uncertainty. And this new awareness is kind of scary, but you just have to get used to that. That's how it is. So another philosophical idea that helps me with being vulnerable in the world, as
Hmm.
in going out into the world and still showing up, not knowing what it's going to throw back at me, is the idea that just because I refuse to know the truth doesn't change it. I have run away from conversations and from facing the truth because I don't want to know the truth. And sometimes I do the conscious choice, and I know that's what I'm doing. For example, I unfollow all my exes and everyone related to them on Instagram. So just because I don't want to know, it doesn't mean that I lie to myself and I don't know that they will find another girlfriend and get married and have children. Yes, I do.
Right.
But it's better for me if I don't know. So you can hide your hand in the sand if you, not hand, sorry, your head in the sand if you want, but just do it consciously. Just know that that the truth is not going to change. If you choose not to know that, good, it's a fair choice. But if you need to know the truth, then that little idea that nothing is going to change just because you know the truth, you're just going to be more aware. It's going back to my previous example. You see, nothing changed about 2020. We were just not aware. Had we chosen to be aware in January that everything is going to change, maybe we would have done our plans differently. Plans which were not so rigid, which actually could bear changing and canceling. Awareness of the truth doesn't change the truth, and that helps sometimes to face the unpleasant truth.
Well, it does, and I love that thought, that quote that you just said about awareness of the truth doesn't change the truth. Because I think in this modern age where we're so focused on beliefs, and that we somehow have decided that what I believe is true, and if I believe, like, if I change a belief, I change the truth, and we change our experience, obviously, for certain things. If you believe you can't do something and then you believe you can do something, you change your experience. But there's almost, at least in America, this idea that what I believe in is true. And so it's not my personal truth, it's like this objective, out there truth. And that's fundamentally not true. And there's a lot of guarding, a lot of internal armoring and internal kind of storytelling that this is my truth, this is my belief, this is my truth, and I'm going to live according to this truth, and I'm going to make everybody else live according to this truth because that's part of my truth as well. And that state of vulnerability is really being open to life, being open to yourself, being open to truth, and being open to the uncertainty, the inherent uncertainty of life. And I think we don't, particularly in the US, and I'm not sure about the rest of Europe, are really, we construct our entire lives to brace against uncertainty, to keep things certain. And 2020 was a big crashing down of that delusion. So it can feel very frightening to live in that place of uncertainty. And it's also a nervous system thing as well. So finding ways to de-stress your nervous system, to breathe, like you did, when you're pregnant and delivering, and to do things in the moment to begin to moderate the nervous system a little bit, and also keep yourself in that place, that little happy medium of being in that place of uncertainty and openness, is something that can be life-changing, I think, because it allows you to actually show up to what's true as opposed to show up to your ideas about what's true.
I think it's universal. And in fact, I've lived in Asia for 16 years, so I also consider myself a little Asian. And I think it's even more so in traditional societies and in societies which are slower to change. Change requires that you adjust. So if you live in a very quickly changing environment, you are more likely to be okay with re-evaluating how you see life. But then similar circumstances can create completely opposite reactions. So we were talking about my Soviet past in previous interview. And on one side, I might say that this huge change that happened to us when we moved from Soviet system to Western free economy, human rights, and all of that system. On one side, it created people who were okay with change, who were very adaptable, who can be at peace with uncertainty and with the changes. And on the other hand, and it's the opposite side of it, it created people who hold on to what it was before, and they cannot change at all, and they're even less tolerant. They're more phobic about everything which is different, just because they're so uncomfortable. Brené Brown talks about uncertainty in one of her books, and she does mention that a lot of our institutions and concepts that humanity values so high are actually constructed for us to deal with uncertainty, which we as humans are not comfortable with, be it marriage, the uncertainty of relationship and of love, be it religion, the uncertainty of what happens after death mostly, but other things as well, politics and political parties. So a lot of the systems are created for us to create the illusion that there is some certainty in life. But there is none. And as I said, only the knowledge of how everything is changing will help you to navigate this uncertainty and to be okay with that, because there is beauty in that. I love Japanese culture of cherry blossoms, in spring, because that is all about change. That is all about, and that season lasts so short. But they celebrate the change because change has to be celebrated as much as we would like to go back sometimes to what it was before. But without change, I think there wouldn't be life. Life is all about change.
It is, and especially now. And it's interesting that you talk about Brene Brown talking about the systems that we've created as a hedge against uncertainty, because one of the things that 2020 and kind of the lead up to 2020 and now 2021 is becoming more and more obvious is that a lot of those structures are breaking down, and that what had seemed uncertain, or what had seemed certain and that they had portrayed as certain, was always uncertain. And we're kind of seeing the chinks in that, and we're seeing those structures break down and displaying the uncertainty that truly exists. And so I think for people to begin to work on and develop that ability to stay in that open, vulnerable state of being okay with uncertainty is going to be one of the major skill sets that we need in this decade, because so much is going to change, and so many of the things that we thought were certain we are seeing are absolutely uncertain. So what are some strategies or ways that you would suggest that people cultivate an orientation of vulnerability while still being in that place of self-love and self-acceptance, and not overtaxing kind of the physiological aspects of being in an uncertain state?
I wonder if I'm actually grasping the full depth of this question. But well, for one, I would like people to separate vulnerability from intensity of emotion. And here we've mentioned Brené Brown a few times because she's good, and she's researched actually vulnerability and shame. I subscribe to her definition of vulnerability, which is not very common, because if you look at the definition of vulnerability means essentially that you are open to any kind of damage. And we in originally that word wasn't actually used so much on humans. It was used like in physical world, but the way Brené Brown defines it a little bit more narrow is that vulnerability is when you are willing to show up to the world the way you are, with your truth, not knowing how the world is going to accept you. And it is very important to remember that the act of vulnerability is when you are doing something despite the uncertainty, despite not knowing how it's going to be received. And that is the only thing. And it doesn't mean it has to be super scary or it has to be incredibly emotional. It doesn't mean that. Because why people sometimes are shying away from that is because they don't want to feel certain things. And obviously, why do you're not going to stick your hand in a fire if you know it's going to burn you. So if you detach that idea and maybe look at vulnerability more as sub-brand of courage. It's vulnerability is essentially courage to act. And it does have it does have a condition. That means also to act out of your true, honest, authentic self. But generally, it is courage to act despite everything, and that is an important thing, because if you don't add extra stress to being vulnerable to the uncertainty, it is so much easier to be that. When we talk about courage, people sometimes think that you can live without fear, but the truth is that courage is not absence of fear. It is action in the face of fear. Vulnerability is action in the face of uncertainty. And I guess that is what I think is the most important as a suggestion, how to be vulnerable in the world. On the other hand, what does it mean to be true to yourself? Maybe being true to yourself is being the super cautious person who doesn't want to be vulnerable. Who doesn't like uncertainty. And maybe your journey is to be at peace with that part, that you are uncomfortable with uncertainty, and be comfortable with being uncomfortable with uncertainty. I don't know.
Yeah, and to be honest with that as part of the process of potentially becoming more comfortable with that, because I do think it is, for most of us, an ongoing adventure of coming more and more deeply into ourselves and knowing ourselves at that deep level, and then also being that in the world without worrying about how the world is going to receive us, the way that Brene Brown says that.
Personally, don't like shedding tears on stage. It's my thing, not just on stage, in public. For me, sadness or grief is a very private emotion. It doesn't mean that I don't need help with them sometimes, but I'm not comfortable with expressing them publicly. And I try to avoid that if possible. Yet, sometimes I am at peace with doing that if I have a bigger reason to do that. For example, I was preparing for a speech at a big event, and to illustrate a point, I needed to share a story, because I can give you a concept, but if I don't give you a situation from real life, that concept is going to be dry and probably not land on you. It's the situations in real life that we can relate to that land any concept from personal growth into actually you almost experiencing it for yourself. So I was preparing for a speech, and I needed to explain a concept that sometimes, to stand for your truth, you have to be okay with hurting people that you love. And that's not about being selfish. That's about being true to what you are, and to understanding that the people that you love, they're going through their own journey, and you can't actually influence their journey, even if you're triggering it, but you can't influence it. So I was trying to illustrate this point, and I had to share a story which actually made me cry as I was thinking about it, because when I prepare for the speech, I usually don't sleep the night before, and then I rehearse it in my head.
Oh dear. Okay.
It's just the way I deal with stress.
Okay.
So I was lying in bed, not sleeping and crying, and thinking to myself, damn it, I will not be able to tell the story from stage and not shed a tear. So I was very in earnest. I was trying to find another story to illustrate the point. So that another story that will not make me shed a tear, because I'm not comfortable with doing that. I don't like my makeup smudged.
I get that, yeah.
But at some point I thought, no, all the other alternatives are just not driving the point the same way. I'm going to sacrifice my personal inclination to be dry-faced on stage. And I'm going to be okay with possibly gagging for breath and shedding tears, even if that's not how I like to be, because I do need to make this point, and it is important, and I do need to share a story which is going to make this point so much deeper and so much more important. And I chose to be teary on stage, and even though I don't like it. But the thing is, you see, I wasn't maybe I was vulnerable because I was sharing this story for the first time, but it wasn't an act of huge courage per se, because I knew what I was doing. And I was okay with being uncomfortable in that certain situation. And I have shared that story again and again, because why did I do that? Okay, the first time when I shared it, I was vulnerable because I didn't know if it was actually going to work.
Right.
But I saw that it worked, and I heard the feedback, and I knew that it was exactly the right story for that situation. And the next time when I shared it from stage, even though I was in danger of shedding tears again, I wasn't vulnerable anymore because I knew the reaction that story would bring out. All that I was risking was my makeup. It is important to understand because sometimes we are mistaken. We are very often, we are okay with being messy, with being frustrated. Sometimes I'm glad when I get really genuinely angry with my kids because I get to drive the point with true emotion. Because sometimes I'm so calm, I can't explain to them that some behavior is not good. So you see, what I'm trying to say is that vulnerability is not really about the emotion per se. It's about you not knowing how what you do is going to be received. And we are sometimes okay with the emotions that we think we're not okay with. We are often okay with anger. We are often okay with fear. We're just used to say that we are not okay with them. So if you separate your emotions from the concept of being courageous and brave and doing things despite not being comfortable with that, then it gives you power to be out in the world, real you, and to be out in the world doing things that need to be done, and to be out in the world being vulnerable, because you understand that this is actually about your choice, about your courage, about your truth, about your values, and not about smudging your makeup.
Absolutely. And that actually illustrates the point that I had wanted to bring out, which was, if you can kind of let go of all of the layers and layers of emotions and expectations that you think you're going to have, and allow yourself to come into just that openness of experiencing what's happening, it's actually often less overwhelming emotionally than if you are kind of in that state where you've got all of those things going on and you're being vulnerable, and you're in the midst of all of that. And so you actually can, if you can let go of some of the barriers to vulnerability, even though it feels scary to do that, you have a lot more energy in that space to experience vulnerability, and it may turn out an entirely different experience than what you had perhaps been afraid of, and being in that uncertain moment. So thank you for sharing that story. I really appreciate it because it's a perfect example of sort of how to navigate.
If you don't mind, I'd like to actually expand a little bit on that, because for some people, being joyful might be vulnerable. Some people just don't laugh. And for them, cracking a joke may be vulnerable. I love joking, but I'm so bad at telling jokes. And often I just want to joke, and I am vulnerable because I do not know if I will succeed or if I'll fail as usual, and people will only give me a pity laugh. The thing is that it's not about the emotion, as I said. It's about how comfortable are you to do a certain thing. How comfortable are you to be goofy, to be weird, to be wrong, to be strange, to be anything, and not fear
Yes.
that the world will reject you.
As I shared with you before we got on, my greatest terror was never around anger or fear or those kind of emotions. Like, the thing that scared me to death was fun and joy and those flavor of emotions, which have just zapped my nervous system. So you're absolutely right. It's not always about, one particular flavor of emotion. It's the willingness to experience all of life in that state of not knowing, even if it's cracking a joke, which I tell you, I would never have done, like, in the first 20 years of my life, I don't think. Or I used to have birthday parties where we were supposed to, of course, have fun. And I would just be in terror the whole time, but anticipating that once it was over, I could go in my room, I could quiet down, and I could re-experience my party and kind of sort of experience a little bit of fun, but I couldn't do it in the moment. So it's totally true that that happens on every level of what we're afraid, not afraid, but what juices the nervous system in an overtaxing way to experience. And so wherever your flavor is, being willing to be more vulnerable in that state, and play in on those stages might be, little by little by little, helps you to become more willing to live in that state of vulnerability.
Yes, I agree.
And I know you have to run. So I wanted to thank you again for our conversations. It's fascinating talking with you. And you can find all of Kristina's links under conversationsfromtheedge.net. You can also find on conversationsfromtheedge.net a link to her seven days to happiness course so that you can begin to shift your happiness set point as well. But where would be the one place that you would send people if they really want to kind of experience the real Kristina?
To my kitchen.
To your kitchen. Okay. Well, perhaps not that would overload your kitchen.
That would be very taxing. So if not kitchen, then my Instagram probably.
Okay, that's probably easier for most people to get to. So check out Kristina's Instagram. It will also be on conversationsfromtheedge.net. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's been wonderful talking with you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really, really stimulating conversation. So thank you for that.
Thank you. This is your host, Kristine Madera. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation from the edge of consciousness. You can find all our conversations at conversationsfromtheedge.net. You'll also find links to schedule a private conversation with me or any of my friends, as well as tools to help you expand your own consciousness and explore what's possible for you outside the boundaries of your current perceptions. Feel free to use this podcast to start your own conversation by sharing it with friends, on social media, in your blog, or even in your own podcast. And as always, live the adventure of pushing your own edge. It's the most amazing adventure there is.